Now, in part one of this interview that I dropped yesterday, I talked about some of the issues that the Browns and Bengals are going to have when they compete against each other. But let's kind of focus in on the Cincinnati Bengals because there's a lot more that meets the eye there in both positive and negative ways. What's Ace going to say about that? Well, let's talk about it. Real quick before this video starts, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. Also, if you want to help me out in some extra ways, I have a PayPal link in the description below where you can send a one-time donation. Or if you're feeling real charitable, you can join my Patreon or follow me on Twitch. All those things are great ways to support me, and I appreciate any gesture that you can show at these times. All right, so with the Bengals, man, there's been a lot of reports, and with the Bengals, there's always like a lot of reports, but sometimes it's like, I think it's like people trying to get an agenda. Oh, the Bengals are this kind of team under Marvin Lewis or whatever it is. But this one just seems a little bit different where they're veterans, guys who have never had, those type of issues, having real problems with the coaching staff or with whatever it is going on there. What can you say to some of those issues? Are they real? Is there smoke is there fire where that smoke is?
I mean, there's definitely some fire, at least with, some selective players. I don't know what they want to get completely out there. I've talked to, obviously, people connected and in the know of what's going on. And apparently it's just been, some players are frustrated with their current roles, right? Whether it's Carlos Dunlap, whether it's Geno Atkins not being able to play as much. Players are just frustrated and they're kind of second guessing the coaching and everything that's going on there because it's almost kind of being positioned to be where they're the blame for certain issues on this team, right? From what I heard, Carlos Dunlap was blamed about defending the run, which he obviously, like in that Browns game, he barely played in that game. So like that was the game where they took off on us. So how can you essentially blame that guy for the run game and not look at your linebackers or your defensive interior or anything like that? Now I could see if the Browns were just killing him on the edge, but like when I turned on the film, he was barely in. And when he was in, it wasn't a thing where he wasn't trying to contain or anything like that. But you're starting to see things like that. You're also starting to see players get frustrated, whether it's John Ross. I mean, to not even play John Ross one snap, we understand that he's maybe considered a bust or something like that. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on where, like, if you're not going to play John Ross and you're going to throw in guys like Alex Erickson and Mike Thomas and make plays for them, but not John Ross, I kind of question you as a coach on what your agenda is. And I think last game we kind of saw that perfectly in the Colts game. If you're paying close attention, if you're in a situation as a head coach where you're up 24-0, a team starts to come back and it gets to the point where the game is close, I don't care what agenda that you have going on with Carlos Dunlap, what agenda you have going on with Geno Atkins with not putting him in there. It's not the right play, and it does not look like you want to win if you're not putting in players that can obviously contribute and help. And, I'm not saying that these guys are still elite. I think that gets lost in translation. A lot of people think, oh, you still think that this is Geno Atkins from 3 years ago. No, I mean, it could be Geno Atkins where he's fallen 10 points on Madden from his overall, but that's still better than Xavier Williams, who was a guy that you just signed off of the street. And so there's a lot of weird things that are happening there. And, it's one thing to try to send a message, and I think we've seen Bill Belichick do this, but Bill Belichick will bench a guy for like a first half or something like that, and then the next game he puts him back in. Not this staff. They are digging their heels in and just being very arrogant. And when it comes to that, I think that is rubbing players the wrong way. And like you said, these are players that have never been known for being vocal. Geno Atkins never had an issue with him. Carlos Dunlap, never had an issue with him before. AJ Green, never had an issue like that from him before. Andy Dalton, never had an issue like that from him before. Cordy Glenn, never really a verbal guy. And like you start to think about it and you go back all the way to last season and you had to know something was going wrong when Christian Westerman retires out of nowhere. As soon as Jim Turner is pretty much hired after a few weeks, then you just see guys just constantly getting pissed off and frustrated. And they've just managed to really do that with all of the guys on this team for the most part. Sean Williams is another guy. Why do you make him a captain if you're not going to play him? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Why are you paying him all of this money? Like, a lot of the stuff that's going on just really doesn't make sense. If they really wanted to have a rebuild and be honest with these players and say, hey, we're going in another direction, these are things that you should have done. And then I think the players also see what's going on with Joe getting hit. And, I think a lot of that AJ Green frustration goes back to years ago, him voicing some frustrations with the offensive line, them not giving the quarterback time to make plays. He's still dealing with that. And I think a lot of people are looking around and saying, hey, if you have, issues with me bringing it every day or what I'm doing on every play, why don't you have that same energy for your coaching staff? Why don't you have that same energy for your offensive line coach to let Joe Burrow get hit or get sacked 8 times? Like, there's nothing that comes out after that. It's always been blame on players, never on the scheme, never on the decision making, never on the plan. And I think that from that perspective, it's like, you can't just blame the players. You have to look at your staff. You have to be critical of yourself. Like, people have been asking for weeks, is Zach Taylor going to relinquish his play calling duties to Brian Callahan? It hasn't happened. And, it simply has been the players are being blamed, where we're seeing the quote unquote Zach guys. And a lot of people talk about that. Like, is it Marvin's guys? Is it Zach's guys? A lot of this is contributed to Duke Tobin. He's picking all of them. John Ross was not a Marvin guy. Like, so if you're thinking that John Ross was a Marvin guy, Marvin Lewis did not want to draft John Ross at all. So it's not a situation where it's like, are these Marvin guys and stuff like that? Because they kind of grew old with the Marvin message as well. But I think what you saw is that they had enough respect for Marvin Lewis to know that this guy has a resume. He's a notable coach in this league. He might know what he's talking about. Even if his message has ran out, he still has respect. Zach and his coaching staff, they're really unexperienced. There's not even just players that question what they're doing. There were coaches that they went after to try to get on this staff, and it was veteran coaches that were like, nah, we're not doing that. Like, nah, that's not happening. So I think it's just been the wrong move that they made from a coaching standpoint. And what they're really trying to do is give Zach a full year with his players, which he went out and got them, and with his system, and it's just not working. It's just really not working. And you have to win to get people to buy in, and they're not winning. Now, Tyler Boyd came out and said that the complete locker room is not separate and in shambles. We'll have to see. I've heard differently, and that was before the Colts game. But we'll see how long that this, progresses as it does. I mean, when you keep losing, it's only going to get uglier and uglier. I was told to watch for something to come this week. It wasn't a surprise to me when players started going live. It wasn't a surprise to me when people started reporting on sources saying that Geno Atkins is frustrated and stuff like this. So I think that it's a bunch, man. They're losing. It's not working. And they need to realize whether the Zach Taylor experiment should be over and they should get ahead of this thing, or if they should try to sit and, like you said on the show yesterday, not try to make an impulsive decision because it would be something like the Browns a few years ago. I don't care, honestly. I'm just ready to admit the mistake and press the reset button, but it probably won't happen until after the season.
Yeah. The interesting thing is I don't even know who would take over in Cincinnati at that point. Also, a lot of things you're saying, it reminds me eerily of Freddie. Just some of the things with like assistant coaches not wanting to join there. So what I'm getting is that I don't think that a lot of people in Cincinnati think that this Zach Taylor is the guy. Is that the case? And also, if that's not the case, who are the people that you would like to see? Because also, when it comes to being the Cincinnati Bengals head coach, I don't think a lot of people appreciate this in the right way. I think people use it as a slight, like, oh, well, Cincinnati's different. But it is different, right? There are different things that you have to do if you're going to coach Cincinnati, like not having your own indoor facility, having to share with the University of Cincinnati. That's a logistical thing that, like, I saw when I went to camp in 2019, that he had a massive problem with Zach Taylor. He did not know how to kind of manage those two aspects of it, and he lost a lot of practices because of that. And that's just something that comes with not only being a new head coach, but also just every other head coach has that facility, doesn't have that problem. The Bengals, that's kind of unique to the Cincinnati Bengals. So what are the traits that you look for in a new head coach? And also who do you think is available or is going to become available that would be a good fit for a team with a lot of young pieces on offense?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of things that you have to deal with in Cincinnati that isn't typical. But there are some advantages to that, right? You talk about Mike Brown. This is a guy that kept Marvin Lewis for as long as he did. So you're going to get a long leash in terms of getting a chance to at least prove yourself. but there's going to be things that you will not be able to control, like indoor facilities and stuff like that. Now, Marvin Lewis, one thing that he worked on when he was here was whenever he would get into a negotiation year, he would always ask for something that the Bengals didn't have. He would use that as kind of a negotiation tactic. I think the next person that you bring in has to be someone that's respected, not only by the players, but by Mike Brown in this organization. It has to be a big name coach that can actually convince Mike Brown that he has to listen to them. Like if I do come in and say, hey, if you want me to coach the Bengals, like let's just say John Gruden. Obviously, he signed a 10-year contract, but let's just say John Gruden comes in. John Gruden's got to say in that meeting, you have to give me control over being able to get a practice facility built and all of this stuff. Now, that's not to say that Zach hasn't had some of that pull, because they actually have had renovations inside of certain facilities, and things were redone, and he was able to hire a much larger coaching staff from what I've heard in comparison to Marvin Lewis. But it has to be a guy that's respected. It has to be a guy with skins on the wall. It has to be a guy that these players respect. Like, you've had a lot of great coaching in Cincinnati. Like, you've got some knowledgeable guys that have been through there, and the players have been used to that. If you're talking about guys from the AJ Green era and so on and so forth. So it has to be someone that actually knows about football. Not to say Zach doesn't know about football, but it has to be a respected NFL mind. The other thing I think is you have to bring in a guy that can not only motivate players, but also can establish a sense of culture. The Bengals do not have a culture. That's what Marvin Lewis brought to the Bengals in 2003, was establishing a culture, whereas the culture before that was pretty much losing, craziness and all kind of other stuff. And I think that you have to have someone that comes in that's able to build a culture in Cincinnati. Me personally, I know people disagree with me on this. I think that it has to be Jim Harbaugh, and I say that for a number of reasons. Number one, you have to have a head coach that is able to grow with Joe Burrow. They thought that it was going to be Zach. I don't think Zach is ready for a head coaching position. He would be a hell of an offensive coordinator somewhere, and I don't know if I want to say hell of a. He'd probably be a decent offensive coordinator somewhere. But I think that you have to have someone like Harbaugh, who's coached the Andrew Lucks, who's coached the Colin Kaepernicks, and taking their game to another level when he's been with them. Also, Harbaugh's respected. I mean, we saw it when he was with the 49ers, when he had that drama and they got rid of him. Patrick Willis retires. Like, all of these 49ers players get upset with ownership, and they're like, nah, we're going. If he's out, then we're out. And I think that that's what you need. And you also have to have someone that's offensive minded, that's familiar with playing the style in the AFC North. And although Harbaugh didn't play in the AFC North, he played and coached in the NFC West. That's another tough division that's very grimy. You got to run the ball. You got to hit people. Like, Zach Taylor isn't really like, it's like he's almost of a kind of like a finesse guy, and that just doesn't work in the AFC North. You got to be able to run the ball. So I think for me, it would be one of those guys. Some people say Eric Bieniemy. I liked Eric Bieniemy as well. The only thing that scares me about Eric Bieniemy is it's almost similar to Zach Taylor kind of, because he's never had like any head coaching experience. So from that perspective, I wonder what he does in terms of juggling, calling plays and stuff like that. Like, Jim Harbaugh's already got that experience. So for me, I would want Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I thought when they divorced from the Marvin Lewis era, I thought one of the things they would do was pick a Marvin Lewis disciple or somebody who had been on that staff for a long time. But I think what had happened was they got so good late in that Marvin Lewis run that they were never able to do that. And by the time they were ready to do that, all the good, assistants were gone. Mike Zimmer gone. Hugh Jackson at that point of his career where he was considered a head coaching candidate, gone. A few other guys were gone. Jay Gruden, gone. All these guys who could have carried the torch, because I think there's a lot of value in the knowledge that Marvin Lewis has. It's very intimate with that Cincinnati Bengals organization, that when they got rid of him the way they did, just kind of got lost. And I don't know how you kind of regain that. It's a very difficult thing to regain, because working with the Brown family, it's a very particular thing that you have to kind of get used to, especially if you want to be a veteran head coach in this league. So I think that's going to be a hurdle. And I think that's going to be something when we look back at the Bengals and where they kind of went wrong with the Marvin Lewis transition, is that they didn't do something like that earlier on, or try to make sure that they could keep one of these guys that they really like to kind of continue on the legacy legacy that had the respect of the locker room. But before we dive too deep into the coaching stuff, because we talked a lot about that, I want to talk about what's Cincinnati missing. We know the offensive line's bad. We know certain pieces are. What are they missing, though? Is it like an identity? Is it just as simple as that? Is this like a 1 or 2 year thing? Or is this like something where you're like, this may take 3-4 years into Joe Burrow's career until we're truly ready to go?
I honestly think I don't think it, and a lot of people, may equate it to being a homer and stuff like that. But, I'm a student of the game. So like when it comes to the draft and stuff like that, I do my research on players. Some of the guys that they've picked up, I've researched into. They have talent like now. Like this isn't a situation where you're like the New York Jets or, even Miami, even though they have some good pieces there. I think that they have pieces that are ready to go. I think the thing that's missing is, like you said, an identity and a coaching staff that is ready. And I think that the coaching staff clearly is in over their heads. This was something that we were worried about. And I think that they're missing that. I don't think that this is a team that you necessarily have to just blow it all up and, start from the ground and reestablish everything. Now, if that happens, then it happens. But I think the feeling amongst the fan base is if you were to have, let's just say Jim Harbaugh, or let's just say even Marvin Lewis with this team, they would not be 1-4-1. Like that's the most frustrating part about this is all the games that they've been in have really kind of come down to coaching decisions. And if you have the right coach in there, if you have the right culture, the right attitude that's aggressive about winning and wanting to be successful, then I think that you have a better product on the field. And I think that's why the players get so frustrated is they realize, and they say this after every game, the players say, we know what we have in this locker room. We know the talent. We've got Joe Burrow. We've got, AJ Green. We got T. Higgins. We got Joe Mixon. Like these are guys that in, any other team would definitely bring value to the offense. And I think even John Ross, like a lot of people get down on John Ross. I'm not a John Ross guy. I just call it how it is. When it comes to any player, I'm going to call it how it is. If John Ross was with someone that was an offensive-minded guru or something like that, he'd probably be much better. Like if Hugh Jackson, let's just say that, and Hugh Jackson, when I interviewed him, he said this. One of the things that he was able to do, I know you guys don't like Hugh, but one of the things that he was able to do and that he talked about is you have to know how to pull certain things out of these players. He said that he knew how to pull certain things out of AJ Green. He know how to pull certain things out of players. Like TJ Houshmandzadeh says this as well, and he works with receivers all across the league. They know Ross can play. Like players know that Ross can play. He has abilities that other guys do not have. But Hugh Jackson said, you got to be able to pull that out of him. I don't think that Zach Taylor and his staff can do that. I don't think that they can get him to the level that he needs to play at. And I think that that's what you're seeing. You're seeing guys that if they were in different situations would probably be playing a lot better. So it's going to take for John Ross to go somewhere else and then him to have like a productive season for people to be like, well, maybe it wasn't John Ross. Maybe it's the coaching. So I think that's what we're missing is coaching. And like you said, an offensive identity. Like I can't even tell you what kind of offense this is. I can't tell you what kind of defense this is. I don't know if it's a 3-4. I don't know if it's a 4-3. I don't know if Carlos Dunlap is going to stand up on one play. I don't know if he's going to, drop off in the flats at one point. I don't know if they're going to play zone or man. It's just no identity whatsoever from a culture standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a team standpoint.
It's very concerning. I would be concerned. And that's not a hallmark of having great leadership in the head coaching position there. But it's been interesting having you on, Ace. Ace, let them know where to find you at, man.
You can find me at New Stripe City on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at New Stripe City. You can also find me on AFC North Talk, where me and Quincy are joined by two other distinguished gentlemen by the name of Tony Serino and Sonny of SZG Sports. And yeah, that's pretty much where you can catch me at. And you can also catch me privately outside of Paul Brown Stadium with the sign saying "Fire Zach Taylor."
He'll be the first one there. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.